What I'm going to do today, three things. Why should we focus on emerging markets? Why are we so focused on some of these things? The rationale for it. What are some of the key differences between markets where like an emerging market compared to something of a place where people are so used to mobile devices? And the things that you might want to keep in mind if you want to kind of get engagement from the next billion users. Who am I? This is me in pictures. I've shown this in many talks, so if you've attended any of my previous talks, you might be familiar with this. But I look like the guy in the center most days because I code a lot, and that too in the middle of the night. So I'm caffeinated, coding. You can get a response from me at 3 in the morning faster than you would get at 3 in the afternoon because I'm like really focused in on things at that time. In fact, I had a small stint as a manager. That's why the Dark Vader. And then I moved back to engineering. After 2 years, I said, enough is enough. I moved back to engineering. So I went from the dark side to the good side now. And interestingly, at Google, we get a badge. If you ever worked as a manager, we'll get the Dark Vader badge. So a fun fact about Google. Things I worked on the Linux kernel earlier in my career, then moved on to Android. Now, being in Google, we can't get away from machine learning, so there's a little bit of machine learning. I'm no expert in machine learning, by the way, but I do dabble in and out of that a little bit. Enough about me, let's move on. Yeah, that's my day job, by the way. I talked a lot about it, but that's my day job. I work as a developer advocate at Google. I manage developer advocacy for the country, working with a lot of the top partner apps in the country. Coming to the session, why should we focus on the next billion? It's a huge market that most people are not really targeting at this point of time. This is where the growth is 2 times larger than any other market that you have. Because a lot more of your users, if you put out a solution right now, you are going to see a lot more users coming out from this market than maybe the developed nations. The adoption, if you just say the adoption in both of these markets for a very successful solution, this is where a lot of them are gaining traction now. And there's a huge increase in the smartphone adoption at these places. But at the same time, they experience solutions slightly differently. And those differences are what I want to call out in the next set of slides out here. Those are things that you want to consider when you're building the solution so that your solution is tuned to these people. A typical user's priorities are different. I want to call this out a big slide basically because this is something that is very important to keep in mind. A lot of the literature that you see is based on user research that happened on the West in a developed nation. So you really need to kind of start looking at that user in these regions, how their priorities are, what they really take into consideration when they are looking at an app. And that is important for you. It is completely different in terms of when you start thinking their mindset. One of them is that a lot of people perceive internet to be slow. It is slow. If you go to a tier 2, tier 3 city, a majority of users experience it slower than advertised. I understand Reliance Jio did make a lot of difference in the country. That's past 6 months. But the perception of people hasn't changed that quickly. If you still ask people in tier 2 cities, they still say internet is kind of slow. So you want to keep that into mind. Secondly, it is also expensive. The expense has come down drastically in the last 6 months, but people are still turning off their data. If you check that data, right, people still don't keep their data on all the time, even though the internet speeds have increased as well as the cost has decreased considerably. But this is more of habit than really being worried about the cost. They're still being cautious about it. So you just cannot say that, oh, most people are on Jio, so they will be on all the time and make assumptions like that. The other critical factor is a lot of them are prepaid users. How many of you here are prepaid users? A much smaller percentage, but you develop for people who are on that prepaid channel. So the experience they have, they are more aware of the balance. They're more aware of how much money is going out of their accounts, which means that they're going to be more cautious about allowing data or anything that consumes money on their devices than postpaid users. So you need to think of this factor a lot. A lot of your users are prepaid users. In fact, according to research, it's 95% of subscribers in some of these regions. So you have that difference coming in there. And what Ravish mentioned, a lot of these guys are actually coming in first time mobile users. Their usage experience is different. What they actually, the patterns they are used to are different. How they perceive their applications and how comfortable they are with interacting with the UI is different. You need to take these things into consideration. In short, we just need to rethink the parameters. A lot of this is something that you know already, but we need to kind of rethink these parameters when considering tuning these apps for regions like ours, so that more users find it more easier to onboard on them. More users find it more convenient to work with this. Let me go through the details. Talking about the users, they might be on a smartphone which is maybe 6,000 rupees, like 150, less than $150 if you think of it. But they don't want to experience the internet differently. They don't want to experience your apps differently. They want the full-fledged experience. A Flipboard app that doesn't flip is not something that will give you the same sort of happiness interacting with, right? So it's not about making a stripped-down version of the app. When somebody wants a bike like that, they're not going to be happy with the one in the bottom. So don't make your apps like stripped down, less functionality. The light word doesn't mean that people are going to be happy with something that does not provide them the grand experience of working with a full app. This is an engineering problem, okay? Working with flaky networks, working with less RAM, working with slow process, these are engineering problems users want us engineers to solve. They are not going to give you the credit for saying that, oh, I have a device that does not have a lot of bandwidth or does not have a lot of computing power, so the developer gave you a substandard experience. No, they are not going to do it that way. So this is an engineering problem they want us to solve. So please look at it from the fact that we have high expectations. They demand apps to work, behave better, like no jankiness. Even if it's a $200 device, your app should perform well. That is a minimum. It is not like that is like, oh, that is a good thing to have. That's a minimum benchmark that users would want you guys to provide your app set. So engineering, better solutions, considering these things is critical. Battery usage. How many of you want 1 more hour of battery on your devices? If somebody is not raising their hands, I would really want to talk to them after this. But the reality is every one of us wanted, I want 5 more hours. But the whole idea is, a lot of times, it's the apps that we have on our devices which make this difference. India, by far, if you look at the stats, has one of the lowest average battery life for devices. And that's a lot due to the kind of apps that are running on the platform. So it is up to you guys as developers to ensure that users have a better experience on their devices when they install your app. If you were to kind of drain that battery in 2 hours, that's the first thing that they're going to do is uninstall the app after the first day when they realize that that app is actually taking bandwidth or taking battery. This is now becoming one of the #1 reasons why people uninstall apps. It's slowly trumping the fact that disk space problem, which all of us talk about. Okay, there's not enough space on the disk, then people uninstall my app. This is now becoming one of the top reasons from the region. So be conscious about how you actually consume battery in your app. If there are things that you could use in order to make things better from a battery life perspective, do that. The last thing you want to do when you have like 5% left in your battery is an app to upload a large video or a photo from your app. So if apps could consider those considerations of what is there on the device, how much battery there is, can I defer it to a point where it is connected to a charger? These sort of things will matter to the user. This gives a much better experience on the platform as well as with your app. So the chances that they will uninstall because they feel your app is actually misbehaving or they feel that your app is too much drain on their device will go away. Mobile network. Yes, we have 4G, but a lot of places, maybe in Hyderabad and Bangalore and Delhi, we have a good spread. But a lot of the tier 2, tier 3 cities don't have the speeds that they advertise. They have flaky networks. They do have to rely a little more on the fact that apps will consider this and then work accordingly. Simple things like text first, image later. These are principles that you can apply to make your apps feel more responsive on slower networks. Maybe one other thing to consider is if the hardware has a lot more capability, doesn't mean that the app will perform better there. The person is on a 4G LTE device connected to 2G. Immediately, the device is the 2G device at this point because that's all the pipeline is going to get the data from. So having an understanding of that, Understanding that, oh, the user is on a 2G network, let me load a slightly lower resolution image. Instead of making him wait for 10 more seconds, let me give him the experience of at least a lower network, get the image out there faster. The responsiveness of the UI becomes better. Things like that happen which delight the user a lot better. So work with the mobile data. Test on airplane mode. This is a test most people don't do. When you're doing test cases, you might do it on a slow speed network. If you're not doing it, do that. Also test on airplane mode, because a lot of times users might have their internet turned off, or they might not have network connectivity at the region where they're opening your app. You don't want your app to crash at that point. You want the app to gracefully degrade or give a degraded experience if it can provide, but never crash on those conditions. So if you're running test cases, not if you're running, you should be running. And when you're running test cases, you need to kind of go ahead and ensure that you test on an airplane mode. Just run your app on airplane mode. See whether it conveys the information that, hey, in this region, I cannot work without the internet. Or at another place, if it can show data which is there in the cache, it does that properly, conveying the message to the user that, yes, I'm showing you older data, but that's because I don't have internet. So that really matters, gives a better experience to the user. What do you think the cost to an app is? A lot of times people actually consider that, a dollar value or a rupee value on the app. But if you're charging your app for free, like you're saying, that is a zero value. Do you think that's the cost of the app? Not really, because you should consider the fact of the data cost of downloading and also running your app. If you are downloading a 20 MB app and the initializing with 5 MB of data from the internet, that's 25 MB of data. That is the cost of your app. So it's not the dollar value or a rupee value that you add as the initial payment, but also the cost. People see it that way too. They will understand this, that your app is consuming a lot more data. It's taking a lot more of my bandwidth. It becomes a point of people deciding to uninstall your app. So this is something that you got to consider. Making your app size small is important for our region, because somebody on a prepaid phone, on his last 25 rupees of internet data available, then thinks whether I should download a large file or not. That is a lost customer equal to lost business, equal to lost revenue. So making your app small is important. Data usage, adapt to the network speeds. That's one thing that I'll keep calling out, adapting to the situations on the phone. If you have a 2G network connected, if you're on a 4G network, pull out 100 articles if it's a newsreader app, because it'll come faster, the user can actually use it. If it's on a 2G, make that data smaller, the chunk smaller, because the experience of downloading 100 on 4G might take 4 seconds, but on 2G might take 20 seconds. So you don't want the user to wait for 20 seconds, you want to kind of make that smaller so that he still gets an experience of having it run at having the UI populate and everything happen within the 4 seconds that you thought about, those SLAs that you're keeping. Anticipate what users want. One of the common pieces of information that most people miss when they kind of design their UX is you have a lot of data how people use your app. The pattern in which people use your app. Take, for instance, a newsreader. This is data that I have actually found in using a newsreader app that I wrote myself. 80+ % of my users always start with the same source all the time. Everybody has a preference of the source that they start reading with. 80+ % of my users. On weeks, it's 90+ also, but average is 80+ over 2 years. Now, what I do is I load that data first, not other things. I just load that data first, so that when the user clicks on that, opens my app, clicks on that, he always gets the latest news. You might think, oh, what happens if the user clicks something else? What about the 20 other %? So my question there was, do you want to get a degraded performance for 100% users, or do you want to delight 80% of them? That is what you want to answer. It's like a cache. Sometimes it will miss, but that is 20% of the time people might click on something else. They will have to wait for a few more seconds for the app to refresh the data. But still, for 80% of the time, users instantly get that. So funnel the information of how people are using your app, that analytics back into how you design experiences. So syncing data from the network, loading data on the screen. All these things can be tuned or tweaked based on how users are using your app. That's one really useful piece of information. Use OS constructs like Firebase Job Dispatcher or Job Scheduler, which is there for newer Android versions, to kind of help your app schedule jobs like network uploads or syncing, where the system will consider all the tasks that is handled to it. When you actually pass something to Job Dispatcher or Job Scheduler, what the OS does is it knows all the tasks that are scheduled through these libraries. Then it will decide, oh, I can batch these things together. So you have something at 12 o'clock, something at 12:05, and something at 12:10. The OS will be smart enough to think, maybe I should batch all of this together and then run it in one shot so that the amount of time my network hardware is to run at full strength reduces. So there are optimizations like that that the OS can do when you use constructs like this. And please use them. Wherever the OS can fine-tune, help the OS by providing you the information. A sync job should not be a service that you write. It should be handled over to a job dispatcher, which is a library that is backward compatible, or a job scheduler which starts from M. That's where you really need to kind of help the OS optimize things. Other one, data saver settings. In your devices, you have something called data saver, which allows only the app in the foreground to kind of send data. Respect that, because the user turns that on, or the user would most probably turn it on when they want to save data where they are on the last 100 MB of their limit, things like that. So if you respect that information, like if the app is on data saver mode, your app comes to the foreground, gets network access, you want to just download lesser amount of data to save the bandwidth. You don't want to just suck the last 100 MB by syncing data, large data. You want to kind of call it out to a different, maybe go onto an unmetered network before you start uploading information or you start pulling more data down. Give maybe a lower threshold, like for instance, in a newsletter article, maybe instead of loading the 1,000 new articles, load just the first 25 of them, so that you don't really suck out all the bandwidth when the data saver mode is running. It's an indication of what the user's intent is. Think offline. Offline is a state where people think of it like an exception state. It's not. It's kind of the normal, one of the normal states through which the user goes with using your app. So think about this. Offline architecture with less reliance on the network is something that you should build in if your app is very popular in these low, in areas where there could be a flaky network. So you really need to kind of see that it works decently. Like I mentioned earlier, it works with a better user experience to the user. Maybe load data from a database. So every time you're getting caching data, you're not pulling everything from the server, you're pulling it, storing it locally, and then you're updating your UI. This way, what happens is when the network data is not there, you can still populate data from your cache. Things like that will really, really help. Be resilient to network changes. It can happen that the user is traveling. This is a mobile device, which means people are on the move. It's not portable. It's just not like I will use it standing here, so my network conditions will be what it is there. I will take this around in a car, take it in a bus, work with it. So network states keep changing. It could get connected. It could go into a high-speed network. Then network speed can drop. The network speed can become 0. You need to be aware of these conditions. You need to be your app should be aware of this and adjust itself accordingly. One common state which we need to actually deal with is you're connected to 4G network, but the data download is 0 bytes. If you look at the network interface, it says 4G, but the user shouldn't wait infinitely because the data is not coming. Stuck in a traffic block, in a large traffic block, you will experience this a lot of times. I come from Bangalore. We have traffic blocks long enough where we experience this all the time, where your phone says that it's connected to 4G network, but the bandwidth the bandwidth that you get is really, really low. These conditions should be like have timeouts to your network listeners. Things like that will kind of help you mitigate these situations or work around these situations, giving a user a better experience. Think about partial loading states, because this is something that happens a lot of times in our loading. Half of it is loaded. Sometimes the connection goes away in that state. So partial loading states are something that you need to kind of take care of when we are building for our networks. It's not just connected, loaded. There are states in between that happen. So you might test these on Wi-Fi. You say, call the sync, and the sync happens instantly in 1 second. So you don't put a UI state which says syncing, 10% done, 20% done. But on a 2G network or an edge network, these states become really important to keep users engaged. User is not like, oh, this screen is frozen. He doesn't have to guess what's happening on that device at that point of time or on that app at that point of time. So partial loading states become really important. This is again a common pattern that you see, no network connection. We see it a lot of times, apps saying this to you. But this is kind of useless because, yeah, but what do I do about it? For a first-time user, getting this is just no actionable data there. It would be best if you should figure out whether the data setting is turned off and then tell the user, do this. So having a call to action instead of telling a problem that I won't work because there's no data. But instead of that, giving a call to action will actually help you have users continue on your app. So avoid these sort of common things, because if you go to a developed nation, this will come very rarely. So this is fine when you actually show it like there's a problem, you might want to check it yourself. But in our conditions, sometimes it comes in too often. So you want to kind of help users, tell users, not like you figure it out, let me help you. These might be the probable reasons. You could do these things. So have a call to action to conditions that are outside your control so that user can actually check. Is your data turned off? Or why can you check under settings this place? Because some of these users are not used to these devices or OSs as much as you might be. So you want to kind of help them get that fun. Device storage. 1/3 of users get this message daily. It's a lot more than you think. We have a lot of devices with low storage. We have devices in our regions, a lot of devices with lower storage. People install a lot of apps, everything consumes a little bit of information. But when this comes up, that message comes on the screen and the user clicks on it, he gets a list of apps which is using a lot of the data. That's the point where he'll say, oh, this app I'm not using all the time. It's consuming a lot of data, let me delete it. Lost customer for you. One trick that you could do is whenever this notification comes, just before that, the system actually sends this broadcast, action device low, storage low. This is a point in which your app can capture this and then kind of delete its caches. And that will allow you not to be there in the list of apps to be deleted. Because your app can actually say that, oh, I don't need this cache. Let me empty the cache because the device is running low on space. It could be an image cache which is like hundreds of MBs of data which is associated to your app. You delete that cache, your app is not going to come on the top list. So you can react to these system broadcasts and make your app not be the candidate for deletion by the user. So think about this. Have a broadcast receiver which gets this and then clears up the cache when the device space runs low. It'll save you some uninstalls automatically. Adaptive behavior, because this, I did talk about it, but low RAM, you can actually capture low RAM from by adjusting or work around low RAM by adjusting to some of the calls that I've mentioned here, like get memory class. When you start, how big your cache sizes should be, how much data should you pull from the server, because the more you ask, the more JSON is going to come or XML is going to come, which means you need more memory to parse it. You need more memory to kind of store it in your memory. So all this can be controlled by thinking of what is the class of memory, how much RAM is available for you to work with at that point of time, and kind of adapting if you see that, oh, there's only 10 MB of RAM that's left for my app to be allocated, that's not a point when you want to load a high-res image on your app. You might want to wait for more RAM to be more RAM to be kind of released. And adapt automatically to these conditions so that you don't get the out-of-memory exception and you don't have to deal with that as much. It's a tricky exception to deal with if it is based on images. If you have a lot of images, those are places where you will need a lot more of this. Language support. We talked about a lot today, so I'm going to very quickly do it, but local language support, really, really important. A lot of users will actually appreciate that, not just in India, globally. A lot of places, education is in their local language. India, we use a lot more of English or it's an aspirational language, but if you go to France, if you go to Russia, English is not the aspirational language for them. They are not always trying to learn it. And I had this first-hand experience when I worked in Portugal. Portugal, everybody studies in Portuguese. Even engineering, their textbooks are in Portuguese. So their need to actually study English is a lot less. And so it's difficult for them that they would really prefer to actually have text in Portuguese. They wouldn't want that to be in English. So it's not like they love to learn that or anything. They're like, they are comfortable with English. So if you have Portuguese, that's great. English, okay. You want, then I'll stress myself. I will take that effort to kind of work with your app. But when your app is optional, that's not what you want. Portuguese, if your competitor supports the language that they like, they will move on to that. APK size, really, really important. You give a 25 MB app, immediately the number of installs on your mobile data decreases drastically. A lot of the top apps like Flipkart, Myntra, all these guys take a lot of effort to kind of crunch the size down. I work with a lot of the large partners, so I know that this is a big consideration for a lot of them, and they've seen strong correlations between the app size versus download size, number of downloads. When they reduce the app size, their downloads increase. So they always take it very seriously, control this one. They evaluate libraries very seriously to see how much weight that gets added to the app when they actually take up a new library. So this is something that you want to kind of keep trying to reduce. Try to keep under 65K, which is the DEX limit. It's not always possible for large apps and apps with a lot of functionality, but still, if you can do it, do that, because then on older devices, the performance is consistent. If you're multi-DEX on older devices, Android devices, the performance is slightly degraded, especially the startup time. Keeping it down here kind of gets a consistent experience on all the devices or across your user base. Update cycle. This is something quite interesting in India. In India and in the next billion users don't update that often, which means your testing needs to be really, really strong. You can't make a mistake that causes a crash and say that, oh, I will release my APK in the next 3 days. It takes users roughly about 6 to 8 weeks to update to the latest version of the app. Majority of your users, like 90% of users, to move to the next version. So your testing needs to be a lot stronger to capture all these sort of conditions and not think that you have an option to upload a new APK, everybody will immediately switch over. That doesn't happen that easily. And all our data shows that very clearly, that people actually have slower adoption to newer versions, and that is something that you need to consider. This also kind of you might want to also think about, if you're a security app, security sensitive app like a banking app, you need a way of communicating to user that they need to update. It's important to upgrade immediately. Some apps even go to the length of kind of going and doing force update. They will not let the user continue unless and until they update the app. So for security sensitive apps, these are all options that you might want to consider. But if you're a photo sharing app or something that's not absolutely important, you don't want to force the user to upgrade, you might want to nudge the user. You might want to send out notifications to older versions at the appropriate time when they're connected to the internet, when they are on unmetered network. You want to send that notification telling them that, hey, maybe you should update my app right now because we have a security patch that's there. So these things are important to call out. Notifications. Not all users are online all the time. So having a notification with like 2 hours as the expiry time does not work in India that well. I did some research on this last year, and 12 hours was something that a lot of partners were using. We got like something like 12 to 15% improvement just by making that 18 hours. Just another 6 hours more to the lifetime of the notification bumped up the rate of delivery by a lot, because a lot of people turn off data. And you need to wait for them to turn it on before the notification can be delivered. Putting a smaller TTL, time to live, for the notification makes it more susceptible to be expiring in the time the user has actually turned the data off. Somebody who turns the data at 9 in the morning and then turns it on again at 9 in the, or 6 in the evening means they're offline for a larger amount of time than 4 hours. So the notifications will actually reduce. There are other techniques that we use in order to improve notification, but some of the partners do get it as high as 85%, 75 to 85% delivery rates in India, working with a few of the design patterns that we've talked about. And also understand the user's behavior. When does your users actually come online more? When is a majority of the users coming online? That's the point where you want to kind of send a notification. Don't do it in the middle of the night. Users will get irritated by that. You want to kind of consider all these factors and then start using notification channels better and have lesser number of them expiring. Play service availability. This is another concern where a lot of the libraries require the latest play services, But the same update cycle problem that I talked about earlier comes back here, where people don't update that often. So Play Service also has the trend of getting updated not that regularly. So if you're putting a library that requires the latest and greatest of Play Service is available, you might want to check how much of your, what percentage of your users are actually on the latest version of Play, and then make a decision on that. Because the last thing a user wants is he is actually on a slow speed network, they open your app to use it, and suddenly the pop-up comes and says, download 20 MB before you can use my app. Or download some X MB before you use my app. Or update something. These sort of messages are not something that they want to see when they're on the move. This is something that should happen. So Play Services availability, if you can actually track that in your analytics and see that, oh, majority of my users are on Play, so only a smaller percentage of users are going to see this update dialog. So the number of people kind of thinking about it and dismissing the app because they don't want to update at that point reduces. Garbage collection, low RAM devices have this a lot more. The reason I called it, this is a little technical, but the whole point is when you're testing your apps, if you look at the performance monitor, there's an icon for garbage collection. So you can actually have garbage collector ask garbage collector to run on the emulator or on the device when you're actually testing your apps. Use that as a testing option, because if you might test it in a point on a high-end device where the garbage collector is not coming. But when the user uses it, if the garbage collector comes in between the large expensive operation, you will start seeing janks. So you want to kind of test by trying out the most expensive operations in between what happens when the garbage collector comes. Will the user have a very bad experience in the UI because of that? Something that you want to test out and keep this as something that you want to tell your tester to do when they are running some of these really fancy animations on your screen, if your UI has that. When the animation is going to happen, just click on the garbage collector and see what is the effect of it. Does it gracefully degrade, or does it really cause a confusion to the user? User behavior, I think Ravish talked about it a lot, but then you also need to consider the fact of first-time users, very sensitive to battery usage, online, offline patterns. These are all additional things that you can consider when you decide your how you want to cater certain features to the user. Very highly likely to give 1 stars on the first crash. We are. As a region, there is this trend of regionally how people negatively rate the app. Indian users very quickly rate it. If you ask your own self, how many of you give 5 stars for a lot of the apps? Majority of people kind of say, I give 4 because there's always room for improvement. True, that's their benchmark. This is quite democratic in nature. They are always allowed to do that. But there's a sensitivity towards negatively rating something because they expect the standards are really high. So you want to consider that. Designing differently, I'll just quickly skip over this because Ravish did talk a 45-minute talk on this one. So it's most of the things that he mentioned here. Learn from other tech. When we talked about PWA, a lot of times PWA highlights what apps shouldn't do. Or they tell you the problems that users face, like install friction, the app size being larger. So when you actually see other tech, don't ignore them. Let's understand from them why they are actually working really well for some segment of audience. You could actually take cues from there. PWA works really well for tier 2 users. Why? Because most people are used to web. Then maybe bring in an experience from there, or bringing in one of the characteristics of those technologies into your app might get your app to work a lot better on those for that segment of users. So learn from other tech too. Local trends. I would strongly suggest you to optimize for local trends. There are a lot of festivals in our country, so have people spend more during festival time. So maybe your promotion campaigns could actually take that into consideration. Things like product launches, like Android Auto was launched last year. New network products like Reliance Jio came out. So you want to kind of keep up with these network trends or events that happen outside of the ecosystem, but which affects the ecosystem in a way. Because when Reliance actually introduced the network and gave data for free, the consumption of video increased drastically. So if you are a product which is an entertainment product, you might want to focus on giving a lot more of video at that point to kind of increase the usage of your app and increase the engagement in your app. So these are some of the things that you want to consider. I understand I talked a lot of these factors, but keep some of them in mind. Give them priority. I think a lot of you guys know all of these things, but it is more about keeping these things in mind when you're designing your product and your solution. That will actually make it a lot more easier. It's like all these small inches add to the mile. So they are not going to, one of them is not going to make 50% improvement in your downloads, but all of these small things do make a difference when it comes to the whole solution. Like Ravish mentioned, these are our channels. The Google Devs India channel on the Twitter and Google Developers India. These are two channels that you could follow to understand more about events, talks, and new content that we roll out. And that's it from me. That's my Twitter handle if you want to follow me. Thank you.